Ladies and gentlemen, we are live! This is day 2 of CCW Online Part 2, Performance and Agents. Yesterday we had several fantastic sessions exploring what it takes to deliver a customer-centric experience amid the kind of business scrutiny you're sure to be facing. We looked at strategies for driving performance, strategies for spurring growth and driving the right kind of change. Most importantly, strategies for delivering a better overall customer experience. We also had a lot of great networking opportunities in that exhibit hall, which will remain open today. If you didn't check out the various technology demos, the free content downloads, the chances to consult with various customer experience experts, you really missed out yesterday, but you still have today and tomorrow to make the most of the entire CCW Online virtual experience. But right now, our number one priority is really developing a great customer experience program. We want to look at what it takes to not only care about the customer, but to actually deliver for the customer. We want to demonstrate that that action is possible, and more importantly, that results are very much possible. You all know you've read so many articles, and frankly, you have common sense. You very much know that you are looking to create the best possible customer experience. You understand the correlation between a great customer experience and the kind of satisfaction that drives loyalty, which in turn drives revenue. What's been very difficult is wowing the customer amid the various change that happens internally as well as externally. The technology in the market changes, customer demand changes, and your business constantly has organizational issues that make doing exactly what you want and exactly what the customer wants very difficult. However, there are common foundations that can allow you to be sort of, resistant to that kind of change and can ensure that you're constantly getting closer to your customers, constantly delivering the best possible experience, constantly achieving what your business knows it needs to achieve and what your customers will love you for achieving. And we're going to walk through those foundations today in a session that's fittingly titled The 7 Foundations for a Great CX Program. Speaking about this is a man who actually developed these foundations, shared them a while back on the CCW Digital website, and is going to be exploring them in much more detail today. We have Ben, we're very proud to have him as our opening speaker for day 2. Ben, how's everything going?
Everything's going great, Brian. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely, and the response to your initial article was so strong, and I think that's really great because whether it was serving as a wake-up call or whether it was serving as sort of affirmation that organizations are going about the customer experience correctly, you need to know that you have these fundamental tenets in place, because without that framework, whether you're talking about adding technology or maybe changing a process here or there, if you don't have the right framework, everything is at risk of crumbling, and you're really at risk of being swallowed by different changes in the market. But if you approach it correctly, if you think about the customer, think about the business, and make sure everything's aligned, you're going to be much more agile and much more capable of consistently delivering the customer experience that you know you need to do, but maybe haven't always known how. And the reaction really spoke to, I think, the relevance of this topic, the resonance of this topic, and so we really wanted to take a chance to explore it as part of CCW Online. So we're thrilled to have you today.
I couldn't have said it any better. You've got to have the foundations, Brian. You're spot on.
Well, speaking of foundations, the first area I want to cover is really setting the stage. And so I mentioned what businesses know they need to do, what, organizations, they're very aware of the idea of customer centricity, but most would probably agree that they're not perfect. Some would outright say that they're struggling, whereas others would say we're good but not great. In any event, there's going to be some challenges. So I wanted to ask you what is going wrong, but not just your opinion. I wanted to start by saying, from your perspective, what do businesses feel is going wrong? And maybe how does that differ from the different managers and customers within the organization, as well as the frontline agents?
Yeah, so look, I think it's hard to generalize because every business is different, and I think a lot of businesses don't think they're doing anything wrong when it comes to customer experience, that they don't know what they don't know, or they simply haven't got the time to think about it. And I'm talking there about small to medium-sized businesses who are just, trying to get everything done in 8 hours every day. But the businesses I work with generally feel that they don't respect a customer's time enough. They don't understand a customer's end-to-end omni-channel journey across various touch points. So they ask a question on a phone call that a customer might have already answered online, or they force customers to call or come into a store because they haven't migrated certain functions to digital self-service, or they simply make customers wait because they are under-resourced at a time of high demand. When you're thinking about managers and employees or frontline agents, I think when it comes to employees, the ones I speak to commonly feel like they aren't supported enough to deliver great experiences. So this may mean that the functions supporting them aren't as customer focused as they are expected to be, or they aren't provided with the tools they need to do the best job possible, or the company's processes make it difficult for them to meet customer expectations. And I read a great quote the other day from Reed Hastings, who's the CEO of Netflix, who said that the more talent density you have, the less process you need. The more process you create, the less talent you retain. And I think what he's referring to there is the amount of processes that, we sometimes put employees through, and it's we talk about customer effort score, but what about employee effort score? I think the harder you make it for employees to do their jobs, I think the harder you make it for customers to interact with you. Or perhaps, you just don't give employees the freedom that they need to provide an excellent experience.
That absolutely makes sense there. And, what about customers, though? Because that's, I think, the biggest disconnect is that people that are listening have probably heard me say this a million times, the so-called great irony, right? So you have we talk about customer centricity and we say we need to put the customer first, and yet we often just think about it from a business standpoint. We never really think about, well, what is the customer looking for? So whether this is you, Ben, when you interact with businesses or customers that you're aware of, what's going on in the general market, what's your sense of what that end user consumer feels is going wrong with the experiences when they actually interact with businesses?
I think the bulk of customers' issues with organisations revolve around them not feeling valued, whether it's disrespect for their time, not knowing information that they've previously shared with the company, offering deals to new clients rather than existing ones, or charging exorbitant prices for parts or service because a customer is locked into them. Customers feel like their custom is valued and they're churning at increasingly rapid rates.
And that's absolutely true. And so when I mentioned your personal take, but specifically what I want to get at here is I think, not just what's going wrong. I think we've covered the negativity to some extent, but what do you really see as the ultimate goal and what's standing in the way of that? Because, obviously there's going to be minor wins, micro wins, quick wins when it comes to the customer experience. But at the end of the day, what is the function ultimately trying to achieve? And why can't we just click a button and make that happen tomorrow?
I think the ultimate goal of a customer experience program is loyalty. It's creating a customer that is going to stick with you for a long, long time. It's the reason that you can't click a button and just make it happen is because it's created by creating a relationship with that customer, and that takes time.
And now, granted, time, of course, is in some ways the enemy of the business world because we're conditioned to look for results and we want them right now. We want to see the impact. And so, naturally, you're going to get some resistance. When you tell people, well, we need to kind of start slowly and build a foundation and build framework, you're going to have some business-minded people that are maybe not directly in the customer experience function saying, well, I'm not going to invest money unless I see an immediate ROI. So you need to be able to show some incentive, I'd imagine. So if the results aren't going to happen overnight, what's the messaging? What do you tell a business leader who doesn't want to invest in this gradual customer experience approach that at the end of the day, it's really the only thing we can do to truly achieve our objective? What is the incentive to take this action to start building that framework, even if the initial results are not going to come right out of the gate?
So there's been, I guess you need to go to those managers who are cynics or doubting and show them the results of studies like the Watermark Consulting study from a few years ago that compared CX leaders versus CX laggards and the Dow Jones Index, and showed that CX leaders well outperformed the market by over 30%, whereas laggards were well underneath it. And, there's data points coming out all the time from studies that, show that the customers are churning faster than ever before. There's the old adage about customers telling 10 people about a bad experience and 3 people about a good one, which has now been well and truly amplified by social media. You need to consistently, keep reinforcing the message that it's the customer-centric companies in this world that are going to survive. And I often refer to customer experience as the last differentiator, because in an age where everything can be copied very quickly, customer experience is the one thing you've got that is going to differentiate you going forward. And you look at companies who are doing it well, and their returns are well and truly above the market.
Well, that's certainly a great incentive, and I think that a lot of people are kind of sharing in that thing, and I think it just really comes down to understanding that this is the only way it's going to happen. And as you mentioned, it's a great differentiator, especially now due to the rise of the internet and the availability of these great marketing channels. The barrier to entry is a lot lower than it was back in the day. And so in order to preserve and grow your market share, you really need to be able to demonstrate that you have a great customer experience, because that's going to be the way that you beat the competition. You may not always be able to compete on price or quality. You certainly can't compete on just sort of cornering the market, because everyone can enter. So if your experience isn't there, it sounds like you're going to be in trouble. But if you do it right, you're going to position yourself for long-term success. And what I want to jump into now are the actual foundations. Now, when we want to jump into the first one being know your purpose. Now, I asked you specifically what you kind of saw as the ultimate objective, and you talked about growing customer loyalty. But I want to dive a little bit deeper to really understand this foundation when it comes to knowing your purpose, because I think that there's a lot of that's going to depend on who you ask. And when you're talking about the organization, I need to know from your standpoint what that means. So first of all, how do you define that purpose? And second, how do you kind of maybe reconcile the different objectives that may be between what the overall business is looking for versus what a customer experience leader is looking for? How do you reconcile those objectives, and how do you ensure that the entire organization is on board with consistent messaging and truly agrees on what the purpose is? Because that agreement, I'd imagine, is essential for performance.
Okay, yeah. So look, knowing your purpose is about understanding why you exist. So it may be to solve specific problems for your customers or to make their lives better in some ways. When you understand the higher purpose you serve and are able to clearly communicate that to employees and customers and different stakeholders, well, certainly from an employee's standpoint, you give them a much larger reason to get out of bed and come to work every day than just to earn a paycheck. And that's very engaging. And engaged employees deliver better customer experiences. So to ensure that your vision, mission and values are understood by the front line, I recommend putting them on your walls and talking about them in team meetings. Continually reinforce them. So create awards for acts which best exemplify what the business stands for. Evaluate all the investment decisions and new hires against their consistency with why the company exists and what it values. And get the CEO or founder of the company to reference the company's purpose when he or she addresses the company. And I think the CX team can assist by bringing the customer view back to the company. So closing the loop there. The customer's perception is the company's reality. So good companies track that through surveys, focus groups, customer advisory boards, and things like that. The role of the CX team is to advise the executive on whether or not organizational goals and values are consistent with customer perception.
And speaking of customer perception, this number 2 foundation is knowing your customers. And, definitely want to dive deep into this, but I want to start off, when you say know your customers, what do you mean specifically?
I think understanding them on a very detailed level and almost an intimate level. So knowing their needs, motivations, behaviors, and preferences.
And now with that knowledge, of course, there's a lot of applications, but you have to get the knowledge in the first place. So, I'd imagine that this really requires a strong voice of the customer strategy, whether that involves looking at feedback, analytics. You can't know your customers if you don't kind of make an attempt to actually get to know them.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's direct ways of acquiring that knowledge, and they can be through surveys, focus groups, and things like customer advisory boards. But there's many indirect ways as well, and you might look at things like ethnographic studies, which involve watching consumers as they interact with your product, or getting them to keep a diary for a specific amount of time to understand what they're going through in their lives when they're not interacting with you. Because let's face it, a customer doesn't wake up every morning thinking, I've got to interact with company XYZ today. They're thinking, I've got to fix this problem today, and they're only interacting with you for maybe half an hour in a day, when they've got 8 or 9 hours every day that they're or 12, 16 hours every day when they're up. But Amazon obtain customer understanding using an algorithm they've developed that looks at all your previous purchases and then makes recommendations based on that. I've worked with companies in the past that obtain customer understanding by using software to determine how customers were interacting with their websites, and then using that data to redesign that website for a better online experience. So Facebook gathers tons of data by looking at the things you read, like, comment on, and share. Non-digital companies can look at a customer's previous purchase history with them to get a better view of them. So there's heaps of ways that you can collect data to better understand your customers.
And now, how much of that knowledge needs to be sort of spit back out at the customer? By that I mean, we all know about the trend of personalizing the experience, but how personal does it really need to be? I mean, you mentioned that you can kind of look at it both macroscopically and microscopically when you're trying to understand your customers. The macroscopic approach may not deliver the most personal experience in the world, but it can be a very effective one. So I'm wondering, is there any sort of breaking point or threshold that defines this is a properly personalized experience versus this is way too general and anonymous and not effective?
Look, I think you can get too personal with experiences, and I think everybody knows the story of Target a few years ago sending maternity advertising to a teenage girl who, because of her previous purchase history with them, which ended up offending the parents because she was actually pregnant. But I think the way to do it these days is to simply allow customers to opt out or opt in. Give them the option. So if you're going to design an experience that is very, very personal, using a lot of data that you've collected on that customer in the past, then give them the opportunity to either opt in or opt out of it.
Now, as we move on to the number 3 foundation, we have engaging employees. Now, everyone's seen a variation of this. I mean, we all know the whole happy agents equal happy customers adage, but I want to know what you are saying when you're saying engage your employees. Is there more to it than just being nice to them or creating a fun environment? What does engagement really mean within the context of putting together a great CX program?
Okay, so let's look at what employee engagement means. So a few years ago, in a Harvard Business Review article, a guy called John Baldoni defined it in a way I thought was really good. He said employee engagement was people want to come to work, understand their jobs, and know how their work contributes to the success of the organization. So from a customer service perspective, intuitively, we know that an engaged employee is going to deliver much better service than a disengaged employee. I mean, we've all been served by someone that just doesn't care in the past, and we know how that feels. But the benefits of higher employee engagement go a lot further than just better customer satisfaction. I mean, studies have shown that there's lower absenteeism, reduced turnover, fewer quality issues, and less accidents. So employee engagement should definitely be an organisational goal. So to engage your team, you need to get an understanding of them like you understand your customers. So what drives them? Why do they get out of bed in the morning? I recommend conducting regular feedback sessions with employees to help you get answers to those questions, to help you create employee experiences that will keep them wanting to come to work every day.
Now, we talked about what gets them out of bed, what gets them excited, what makes them feel invested. Well, the number 4 foundation is really looking at that from an organizational standpoint, and that is the aspirational experience. So, kind of in how I would interpret that is sort of creating overarching goals for where you want to take the experience, because that's going to define the different incremental steps you take along the way. But naturally, we all know, everyone listening, you and I know as well, Ben, that there's a lot of challenges when it comes to achieving your most aspirational experience. I mean, you have practical limitations within the organization. So how do you sort of, or should you be kind of taking into account limitations internally when you're sort of setting that overall kind of destination that you want to reach?
Yeah, so I'll let you in on a little secret here that my co-author on this article, Alicia Clark, and I had a long discussion about the inclusion of this point prior to sending you the article. My view was that you need to define your target to make sure that everything you're doing is consistently working towards it. Alicia, who works within a large financial organisation, so she's a practitioner and doing it every day, she was a little more practical. She didn't see the point in defining an experience that might be so far outside of the organisation's ability to resource it that it's just impossible to reach. Look, so at the end of the day, you might need a midpoint between those two extremes. So as you say, you need to balance your aspirational goals with practicality. And once you've defined that experience, don't put it away in a drawer somewhere to just simply gather dust. I recommend constantly revisiting it to ensure that you're working towards it, and also taking into account external changes such as consumer preferences and technological advances that may mean you need to modify it.
Yeah, and I think another thing to consider too is whether we need to place so much emphasis on that term aspirational, because within a customer experience standpoint, you probably think to mind, oh, you want to necessarily create that Zappos experience, or you want that Nordstrom legend about, returning a tire that they didn't even sell to the customer, or the Morton steak at the airport story. Those are all really great, but that may not be maybe the definition that every organization needs to put forth as their aspirational experience. In some cases, it may just be making sure all your customers are happy, and what it may take to make your customers happy and loyal and coming back is just solving the problem quickly and conveniently. And so I think that especially in today's world, with the rise of low-touch technology and the rise of this effortless concept, it's very possible, and I'm curious about your take here, that aspirational can actually be very practical and also very efficient for the business.
Absolutely. I mean, for years, we've heard the two words surprise and delight. And I don't think consumers want to be surprised and delighted with every interaction. I think I agree with you 100%. I think you just deal with I think they just want to have low effort interactions with a company. So for the majority of the organizations out there, just focus on making experiences what I call frictionless, so that we respect a customer's time when they call in, and we migrate functions to online so that customers can self-serve and do it quickly and easily. You're spot on. We don't need to surprise and delight customers every time. We just need to make it easy for them.
Speaking of making it easy, when we look at the 5th foundation about understanding the journey across different channels and touch points, that's an area where a lot can go wrong, because if you zero in on one channel or one type of interaction, you may miss out on the bigger picture of the customer experience, and there could be some major breaks that you need to address. So what's your recommended approach for, I think, really understanding, first of all, what counts as part of customer experience, and then second, making sure that it's really smooth and seamless and effective across all the different areas where you may directly or indirectly touch your customers?
So when I hold customer journey mapping workshops, I like to get a broad people from different functional departments in the room to get that diverse view of customers and their experience with the company. So you'll definitely have frontline staff representation there, perhaps someone from operations, marketing, delivery, and I also like to have a member of executive in the room because it's important to create that connection back to customers. The approach I go through is listed in the article on the CCW website. So we develop a customer persona, which is a representation of a group of your customers with similar characteristics. We select a discrete customer journey, for example, opening a bank account or getting a new service connected. We look at all the touch points that a customer has with you on that journey, such as the website, contact center, social media accounts. Then at each touch point, we determine what the customer is thinking, feeling, and doing, and how your organization is impacting their emotions. And once completed, we validate that map that we've produced. I call it a theoretical map, with other internal stakeholders before taking it to customers and validating it with them. So you transform the experience at each touch point using your understanding of customer needs, motivations, desires, and preferences. Are you providing the experience at each touch point that they want from you? And look, the example I'll give here is a telecommunications company that required their customers to log into their website to find out if they were just experiencing a fault on their home service or if it was part of a broader outage in their area. And after discovering that customers actually don't like logging into websites when they don't need to, they did away with that requirement because it really wasn't needed. You don't need to log into a telco website to find out if there's a fault in your area. And that reduced customer effort and improved the overall experience.
Now, number 6 is interesting because I think no matter what business you're talking about, the idea of agility and being able to handle change is always one of the fundamental goals and needs of the business department, because the fact is your company changes, the marketplace changes, your customers change, the people within your business change, everything changes, and if you can't change along with it, you're going to run into problems. So, you know, you kind of talked about, I think, setting these overall objectives and aligning yourself with the customers and communicating with the rest of the business. But when all that changes, you know, how do you make sure that you don't fall behind, that you still not only perform for customers what they were expecting yesterday and today, but that you're moving yourself so that you're exactly ready to do what they want tomorrow?
So you need to constantly be monitoring customer expectations, and you do that through a feedback program to develop the agility within your organization to respond to that. I recommend following the principles of Lean. So orientate the business towards meeting and outperforming customer expectations through the relentless pursuit to add value. Work transparently and collaboratively internally to eliminate everything that creates CX friction or doesn't add value. And I guess as you start to make changes to your systems and processes, the best way to monitor the effect of those changes is through customer feedback. So if you're making changes to reduce customer effort, yet your customer effort score metric is trending up, then clearly you've got more work to do.
And I like how you ended that because it segues perfectly into the final foundation, and that is measuring, communicating success. What you mentioned there is, you know, it's not just even about measuring and reporting a score because, you know, yeah, scores are great. You need to know how you're doing, but really the scores should be used as diagnostic tools. They should also be used as action plans. They should tell you, here's what's going right and what's going wrong, and here's what we need to do to fix it. So how do you kind of transform your metrics, your performance management approach from not just measuring what you're doing, but learning what needs to happen and then going ahead and actually communicating and driving that change throughout the business?
So, yeah, really good question. Customer effort score, NPS, You're right. They're just numbers, and they're not going to do anything for you unless you understand why those numbers were given and then do something about it internally. So the way to get to the bottom of why the customer gave you the score is to ask them. So, they've certainly with an NPS question, why did you give us that score? And that's where you're going to get the real gold as to where the customer experience excels or is broken and needs fixing. So I guess it requires constant communication by the CX department with employees. It requires communication from the CX department with the executive. I mean, I once wrote a post about CX people need to be talking with different people most of their days. But and then I guess closing the really important thing with with feedback is closing the loop with customers. So when was the last time you heard from a company telling you what they were going to do as a result of receiving your feedback? So I think closing the loop is critical, yet 99% of companies just don't do it.
And just for a nice cheap plug, one of our research questions for our next CCW Digital report that will be on the customer experience actually focuses on that loop and how you not only acquire feedback, but actually respond and act on that feedback. And so glad to hear you say that that's something that needs to be part of the foundation, because it's certainly something that when I was designing that research really saw as a pivotal determinant between an organization that listens to that hears its customers and an organization that actually listens to its customers. So we probably are running out of time as far as any specific questions from the audience. Any ones that did come through, we'll make sure to pass along to Ben, and you can also follow up with him on his LinkedIn as well as cexpert.com.au, his website, for more details about what he does. But Ben, I wanted to give you maybe a minute or so just to give any final thoughts, recommendations about putting these foundations into play in an organization and creating that great CX program.
Yeah, so look, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from one of my first sales managers back when I first started in sales. And he said to me, look after the customer and everything else will take care of itself. The way I would interpret that for customer experience and customer service people is understand your customers and constantly strive to deliver value to them, and you'll create customers for life.
Customers for life. I don't think anyone's going to turn that down. That ultimately is what we're all about. And I think that everything we've been talking about yesterday, today, and we'll talk about tomorrow is very much going to be on that idea of what can you do to put some meaning behind these customer interactions. How can you put your agents, how can you put your organization in position to, I think, elevate them from one-time things to lifelong, journey-long, lucrative relationships with your customers. And it certainly sounds like by following the 7 foundations Ben laid out here, and more importantly, just following his mindset towards the customer experience, what he was prioritizing. He's talking about getting to know your customers, getting to know your employees, making it all make sense, starting to think about where you fit into your customers' lives, letting your agents know where they fit into the business dynamic, kind of communicating that entire thing so it all makes sense to people. They know the context and they know that they're being heard. That's ultimately what it's going to take to deliver the best possible customer experience. And when you get that mindset right and you pair it with these foundations, you're really going to succeed for your customers and for your business. So Ben, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. It was an absolute pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today.
Great. And we're going to jump right into our next roundtable, because we know you want to build those customers for life, and our opportunity to help you do so is not going to with one session. It's going to continue all day. So let's head on over to our roundtable, performing for your agents so they can perform for your customers.